You are listening to episode number 49 of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. Okay, I feel like I say this every time I do a guest interview, but you guys, I really am so excited about this one. In today's episode, I had the chance to interview Rachael Lasky, who you may know better as the weird science teacher on Instagram. She is a seventh grade life and physical science teacher in Virginia, and she has been teaching for 8 years. Rachael finds success when incorporating visuals in her lessons, and that's why I was so excited to interview her. The visuals she makes are incorporated into anchor charts, notes, review games, and stations when she's working with her students. And she shares a lot of this with the teaching community that she's created on her Instagram through her handle, The Weird Science Teacher, like I mentioned before. And I reached out to her because she is so gifted artistically, and I wanted to hear her wisdom on using visuals in the science classroom, as well as to ask her about her teaching experience in science at the middle school level, since I know many of you listening are middle school science teachers. But we ended up covering so much more than these topics. She offers wisdom on the importance of visuals, but also shares advice for new science teachers, work-life balance, and preparing for and returning from a maternity leave. She was actually on maternity leave with her second child when I interviewed her, and she was wearing her little one in a wrap for his little nap for the first half of the interview. So if for some reason you hear a little baby noise in the background, know that you aren't crazy, that those are baby noises, but they aren't from your end. They are from the actual podcast episode, but he ended up going down in a different place for the second half of the episode. And I'm just so grateful, honestly, for her willingness and ability to take the time to talk with me so that you all could hear from her despite all that she has going on. So it was just especially fun for me too, because I invited her on knowing that she could speak to a lot of areas that I can't because we are very different. But after talking with her, it was just so funny how many similarities in life and in some of our teaching experiences that we actually shared. So I just enjoyed this conversation so much. And all that to say, I really think you will too. So I'm excited for you to hear this episode with Rachael Lasky. And so without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive right in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I'm passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You're in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. All right, Rachael, how are you?
I am so good. I'm so excited to be here, Rebecca. I'm like super nervous, but
Oh my
I feel like
goodness.
there's so much to say.
I
I've
can't
never done this
wait.
before.
Well, I
I
have
know.
so many questions for you, and I'm excited. And I'm just grateful that it worked out for us to talk. So, for everyone
Yeah.
listening to this, we are doing this during our 5 children between us nap time. And Rachel's wearing one of her children as we speak. So, there may
Yes.
be little background noises or interruptions, but it's what it takes to make the conversations happen. So, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
So I know you as the weird science teacher on Instagram. I've been following you for a while, and I know that most of my followers probably know who you are. But for those who don't, why don't you just give them some background on like who you are, your career history, your teaching experience? I know you're on maternity leave right now, but just give them some
hmm
context.
So, again, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And my name is Rachael Lasky. I am the weird science teacher on Instagram. This is going to be, like Rebecca said, I am on maternity leave right now, but this will be my 8th year of teaching. I got I have a degree in biology from James Madison University. And then I followed it up with my education, secondary education master's from George Mason. So from there, I've just been teaching pretty much life science and then now recently physical science the last 3 years. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of changes. I feel like obviously the last 3 years are understandable as for the craziness, but I've been a teacher in a science classroom that lacks scientific things. So no sinks, no running water, obviously, no benches. So it's been interesting. finally have a classroom that is more supportive of a science curriculum. So that's been nice, but I've been sharing a lot of like the artistic side of my classroom through my Instagram handle. And so that's been like a fun way for me to share what I like to do in my classroom and hopefully inspire other people as well, because it's a lot of fun.
Well, and you're so talented. And that's why I'm just thrilled to have you because what you do and your gifts is, I feel like, are so unique and it's so different from where my gifting is, which is why I'm like just thrilled to have you on here, filling in a gap of like something I cannot offer at all, which is like any wisdom whatsoever about incorporating visual arts and science. And so I'm tickled to talk to you. But before we get into more of the art stuff, I
Uh-huh.
know you're saying like you've been this is your 8th year and like the last 3 years have been crazy. And for people who don't know, we were just catching up. She has a 3-year-old and a 4-month-old. So on top of the last years of like society and the world being crazy, your personal life has been crazy. And you have now gone on maternity leave. This is your second one in the midst of all
Uh-huh.
of this. So I'm already going off of the questions I told you I was going to ask you. And I'm sorry, but I
You're
would
okay.
love to know like, how are you balancing? I know it's really hard for a lot of teacher moms to balance going on
Mhm.
leave. And for you, I mean, with your August baby, and I mean, this one is now was a summer baby too. Like, so your leave started at the beginning of the year. So any
Mhm.
like, how do you go about like preparing for that or letting go and letting it be while you're gone? And by the time this airs, I think you're already going to be back for the year. So kind of what is your strategy jumping back in and like reconnecting with students? I would love total side note conversation, but I would love to
Okay,
hear your answer.
sure. So my first maternity leave experience was just like crazy. Okay, so I did everything that I could possibly do. And at this point, like right now, it's the same thing. I just got to do that and not stress about it because last time I did all the things, I stressed about it. Anyways, I went through a whole cycle of here's my expectations for my kids and talking to my co-teachers about like what I was expecting as well. So everybody had the information. We were all on the same schedule. And then the sub who is going to cover for me, like quit after the first after the first day. So then they ended up like dividing my students between the two other science teachers. And so I at that point it's just like, oh my God, I like can't wait to get back to help them out because there's like 35 plus kids in each of their classrooms, kids sitting on the floor,
Mm.
chairs crammed in the rooms because like unfortunately it's a school system where we're already low on subs before the pandemic. So with that, it was just like, I'm sorry guys, I'm gonna be back. And why I say I'm not stressing it like I am because I had a whole game plan. I had my lesson plans and basically my lesson for now is to just start on square one regardless of what you had prepared for your students and your fellow teachers. Yeah, cuz it was a nightmare. I'll be real. I'll be real.
Totally. So mine was somewhat similar in the sense that I had prepared everything and then my sub started and she was not science trained and we knew that, but
Oh,
she started and she was just like, this is like, it was also just, she was like, this is too long of a day. Like, I can't do that. I had 5 preps. One was AP. So then they brought in a second person to do like half the day and she did another half, but then they had to bring in one of my coworkers to do AP biology and help her because AP was too overwhelming. So
yeah.
I get that feeling too of like you want to be totally disconnected and enjoy your baby, but then you feel bad when it's like your coworkers taking the load. So I love
Yes.
that this time though you're just like let go and we'll
I
just
know.
start again. So are you going to like turbo review? Like are you going to try to review stuff they should have covered or are you going to truly start from the beginning or what are you kind of thinking content wise?
So I don't know. I'm going to feel out things with the other teachers,
Mhm.
but
Did you have a real sub this time?
well, see, this is yes, I do, which is great. But with the whole teacher shortage, with the seventh grade alone, there are 5 long-term subs at my school, and
Wow.
that's only seventh grade. So everybody's got their hands full.
Right.
And I feel like since the beginning of the year, at least with life science, it's pretty straightforward. Physical sciences too. So I have a hard time giving you a straightforward answer because we have a new scheduling system this year too. Last year we were semester based.
Mhm.
So by the time I would be coming back, if this was last year, we'd be halfway through the curriculum.
Mm.
So this time we're doing AB days. And I think they're doing stuff on the computer primarily. So I think what I'm going to do is do another pre-assessment type thing, which is boring, but I think I need to do that. And then kind of sprinkle in the what they should have covered previously and do like mini lesson type things. I find though with like all the labs, especially in physical science, I feel like I can cover multiple bases with those labs. So I don't really know, but it's
Okay.
trial and error.
But I love this. I love hearing this because especially as like a recovering perfectionist, and I know there are other teachers listening who are like that. I just feel like I'm like proud of you. Not that you need me to be proud of you, but like that you are just like, I'm enjoying my leave. I'm with my baby and we'll just figure it out when we get there because you're right. Like it's not the end of the world. And when you get back, you'll just assess the situation, read the room, and then just pick up from there, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
because that was my issue with the first time. So it's just not worth it. It is hard to let go though. So,
Totally. Well, and I don't
mhm,
know, like your students are a little bit younger, but since mine were high school,
mhm.
some of them had my number because we had this mentor program at school. So I was a lot closer to some. And, you know, and some of I had given my AP biology students my phone number, and which I regret. But so I had some like students like texting me during their class period with my sub, like about how she was not explaining things. And I was like, y'all have to stop talking to me. Like,
Yes.
I am not sleeping. I don't have the brain cells for this. And I just
Right.
I need to unplug here. And so what I did, because the way my leave, because my oldest was born in March, so it ended like with this, he was born the last day of the third quarter. So I only missed 9 weeks. But when I went back to grade finals, I just did like the ultimate generous grading curve of all time for the final. And it was like an open-ended essay. And it was more just like, can I tell that they learned things? Great.
Yes. Is there some sort of growth?
Yes, I'm proud of you holding that more open-handedly. Mine was almost easier since it went into summer, just to be like, it is what it is, right? You're going to be picking up, but I'm proud of you. Okay.
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you for indulging me. Now back to my questions I had for you. I'm just so excited to talk to you. So I would love to know what led you to being a secondary science teacher, especially because you do have this like artistic inclination and like gifting.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, when I was in school for biology, to be honest, when I have this question, it's like, well, why did I? I don't know. I honestly didn't know what to do with biology. I knew that I didn't want to be in a lab because just straight up lab work, which I'd done in school, it's cool, but not at that, like, they're just so focused in the lab on like one very specific thing and indoors all day. That just wasn't what I was interested in. Wasn't interested in medicine, which is what lots of my peers were. But then, I mean, I have like really fond experiences from science in school. And then I also have educators in my family. So I kind of reflected on my journey through biology and where I kind of got to at that point. And I was thinking about like, I don't remember really anything from my seventh grade, like science experience. I remember the gist of the classroom, but I don't remember anything other than one day we were doing book work. The next day he was at the board going over book work. And it was like this continuous cycle. Looking back, it was also like not a science classroom. There was no lab experience. There was, the pencils on the ceiling, all that good stuff. And I was thinking, I was like, I'm really lucky that I was already interested in like animals and like science. And so that experience didn't turn me off, but that totally must have turned off so many kids that I was surrounded with. And then, so that was when I lived in North Carolina. And then when I moved in the middle of middle school to Virginia, the teachers there, it was like a very different experience. One, the schools are better funded. So I feel like that definitely helps because I had actual science classrooms. But I remember that with the extra science space, we had more lab opportunities, and my teachers were super excited. I remember we did this like really cool, like photosynthesis activity in the hallway with tennis balls. I don't even remember, but I just remember really enjoying how that teacher captured my interest. And it was a great comparison that I had between middle school and high school. And so I was just kind of thinking that with the activities that I had received and been exposed to in high school, you have all sorts of creative aspects in there. Every day is so different. There's so many ways you can implement your personality into the classroom, which is why you have so many different experiences as a student. And so I just figured, let's try it out. And I'm very happy I went that route because science and art are my two loves. And I love that I can easily blend them into the coursework while also incorporating my personality. It's just a fun, anyways, that's how I got there. But I'm very happy with my choice.
I'm so glad. Okay. So even despite all of the challenges in education the last few years, what has kept you in it and kept you, I mean, you're smiling as you're talking about it. So you
Yeah.
obviously still enjoy it. So what's kind of kept you in it despite the craziness of the education world in the midst of the real world the last few years?
Okay, so I have a kind of like cheesy stereotypical response, and that's totally the kids. Like I I'm thinking because I'm on maternity leave right now, as we said, and one of my students, they're emailing me like they're contacting you to just not be a phone, but they're emailing me like, "Did you quit?" I was like, "No," and just like kind of got into these conversations with these kids that I've had previous years, and just the relationships that I eventually form with these kids. Like the kid I'm talking about, she was a tough cookie, very emotional roller coaster because she's figuring out who she is, as they do in middle school. And so it's nice to know that I have this ability not only to teach these young people, but also just form these relationships that clearly have a lasting impression on both of us. I think that's a really important part of being a teacher is forming these connections with your kids. So knowing that I have all these potential relationships for this coming year to form, that's always exciting. But then also, more bluntly, like I'm just not taking work home as much anymore. I just don't have time for it. And I don't have the energy as I did pre babies and pre COVID to do all of this, I guess, extra stuff. I do that still sometimes, but I really kind of focus in on when it's really most important to do so, so that I'm not wasting anybody's time. Yeah, becoming more streamlined in that way, like with my using my prep time, all of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, relationships and how I'm prioritizing my energy. That's the
Well,
best way to put it.
and I don't think that's cheesy at all. Like that's the thing I miss the most about not being in the classroom full time right now. And that would be the reason I go back when my kids are all in school is
Hmm.
because I miss those relationships.
Yeah.
But I also love what you said about, not doing as much as you did because your capacity is different now in the season of life that you're in with little ones. And I love that
Hmm.
you have been able to prioritize that and your students are fine,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
it's so hard to see. I remember I was so anal prepping for my maternity leave, and all of
Uh-huh.
my like coworkers that were all women in their like 40s and 50s who had older kids were like, "Honey, you're not going to care when you're gone with your baby." I was like, "Yes,
Uh-huh.
I will. I'll never stop thinking about school." And they're like, "Okay." And then I got home with my baby and I was like, "I don't even care about school. You're so right." So
Right.
babies have a good way of really forcing a shift in perspective in a healthy way.
Yes. Yes, they do. And I'm learning just like an hour of free time post babies. It's like, whoa, this is a lot of time that I, before babies, I'd be like, an hour, that's nothing. An hour is everything. And I can get so much done now in an hour and still feel like productive while also feeling refreshed. So it's amazing the perspective shift that having kids gives you. It's incredible.
Well, and I feel like my brain, like when a child is not in my presence, my brain like
Hmm.
turns on and I'm so
Yeah.
productive because I'm like
Yes.
borderline in fight or flight. Like I'm like, you have to get this done in
Yes.
this period of time. And then as soon as the tiny humans come back, all your brain cells fall out. And so I feel like it really has, like, you're exactly right. The things that I could do in certain amounts of time, I can do so much faster now when I'm alone because I'm never
Yeah,
alone. So then when I am, I'm
right.
like, let's do all the things. So I
Absolutely.
feel that. Okay. So another thing I want to ask you, and you said you love
Uh-huh.
building the relationships. I only taught a couple of sections of eighth grade science, like 2 or 3
Mhm.
years. Most of my experience is high school. And I had a really hard time building relationships with those eighth graders. They just felt so little. They were so sweet, and I actually ended up liking it because I had them again in high school. So I actually loved that. I did like getting
Oh,
to know
that's right.
them younger and then having them more. But so I just am always fascinated to talk to middle schoolers and people who just love middle schoolers because they're so much
Mhm.
harder for me. So I would love to know kind of what led you to middle school and why do you teach middle school? And did you ever think about teaching like elementary science or high school science or anything else?
Okay, yeah. So what led me to middle school, so I did my student teaching in middle school
Okay.
and I really liked that. But then I also, when I was in grad school, I had a couple of long-term sub positions for high school. So I did like they didn't have AP there, they had IB. I don't know
Mhm.
exactly the difference between the two, but I taught the anatomy course. This teacher had so many preps. I don't know how she did it, but I taught her anatomy classes. She had an IB1 and an IB2. So I taught those classes. And I actually found them like so much fun, especially the anatomy course, because in college, I never took any anatomy classes except for a digestive one. But so I didn't have too much experience with that. But I was really surprised by how much I liked like the high school coursework. But I felt like in middle school, gosh, I feel like the kids are more open to the kids' personalities are just more inviting to like my personality for one, but then also just like how we lay out the coursework. I feel like they were more curious with everything we were talking about because they have not had, I mean, I have them seventh grade. They haven't had science since fifth grade, which is elementary school. So I'm not sure how much they actually retained, but they seem very much like amazed when it gets to the really cool stuff. Whereas the high schoolers, they know it. They know that. They've had that introduction to it in middle school. So the wow factor isn't as much there, I think, for them. And maybe it was because I was teaching more advanced classes, but they didn't seem as curious, maybe the word
Yeah.
is. Because I feel like they already kind of knew it and they were taking these advanced courses for college or something. I really don't know. But I just liked how presenting the material with the kids reflected with the kids in middle school, since it seemed like they were really exposed to this type of stuff for the first time.
Yeah. In high school, I feel like you just have to fight a lot of apathy towards school in general.
Yeah.
I did love that. I felt like that my eighth graders were much more enthusiastic. And I did feel like it was a quicker connection because I didn't have to like prove I was cool or anything. They just were like, you're cool. And then in high school, it's like you have to
Yes.
really work to like, because it was so funny. I would have those kids in eighth grade and then it'd be like they'd come back over the summer and it was like they were a different
uh,
kid. And I'd be like, and they'd be too cool for me. But I was like, I know you.
yes.
We
Yes.
have something here. Don't act like we don't know each other. So I ended up enjoying that aspect of it a lot more than I anticipated. So I don't know do you think you'll stay in middle school forever or is there another like class or subject you'd want to teach ever? Or do you like where you're at?
So I like where I'm at right now, but if I were to ever teach high school, I would definitely be interested in teaching anatomy again. Because I know you said you taught that, right?
Mhm.
What were the labs like for you guys? Because that's what really interested me in that. And I don't know if that's just like a singular experience or if it's across the board for teaching anatomy.
Well, I think anatomy is fun because in most schools it is an elective. So you have a lot of flexibility, which for
Mm,
me, having taught biology and AP biology, where you have an EOC or an AP exam, it's just like so much pressure to teach to the standard. And so I love the
hmm.
flexibility of anatomy to do kind of what you want to do. I know that's not the
Yeah.
case for every state, but for me, I love like practical labs. Like I'm like, I want to get in the local firefighters to teach my kids CPR in our cardiovascular unit. Like I want to do those kinds of
Oh.
things because I'm like you in that most of my experience was not in a science classroom. So more of the
Hmm.
traditional labs are harder for me. Or if I'm going to do a
Hmm.
dissection, I have to coordinate with the teacher down the hall because I don't have any tools or space or equipment to do that, you know? So I got really creative with the things that I was doing. So yeah, anatomy's fun. And I feel like you would be a great anatomy teacher because your drawings. Like I'm up here drawing
Yeah.
stick figures, like help. I
Okay.
can't draw.
Well,
So you'd be great at that.
to answer your question, I think I would teach anatomy, but it is interesting your insight of dissections and like school fundings, man. Like there's so much different of an experience you could be having because my school that I was at, they provided us with all the sheep organs. So they had a sheep brain to dissect, a sheep eyeball to dissect. Sorry, Lance is a little
I
bit
hear
finicky
his
right now.
little cues.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy.
So we had sheep organs to dissect, and so that was extremely interesting for the kids to really see like what we're talking about when we mention the parts of the eye or the brain. And then they had like cats. We dissected cats at the end, and I was so intrigued. It was so interesting. So definitely anatomy and anatomy. I would be teaching that. But it is interesting to still hear about how funding makes that experience different for all of our kids.
Totally different. Okay. So since you're teaching life and physical science right now, what would you say your favorite topics to teach on are and why?
Okay, so predominantly in life science, I prefer teaching, or I get really excited to teach classification and evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So we start off, and I know different schools start different ways, but we start from the small side of things and work our way up. And by the time we get to classification and evolution, the kids are really interested in that topic because they're larger scale and they can understand them more clearly. But by the time we've gone through cells and DNA and all that stuff, they are able to make so many more connections and really kind of just grasp what we're talking about. And I like to use the example of like how, tree of life, we're all related to some degree. That boggles them, that like just their minds like explode when they learn that they have DNA in common with a banana.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's that type of stuff that is so fun. And then you get all of these questions. And so like when I like to teach in my class, I love the opportunity to go on tangents because I think that going through a Google wormhole is a really great learning experience. Like ask the questions. We're going to look on Google. It's going to be on the smart board so you guys can all see the stuff. And the kids get really involved with those types of questions. And then those types of questions and the answer they have lead to more questions compared to what they would ask during like cells or genetics. Those units are cool too, but I just don't get the same response from the kids. So definitely those units, it just blows their mind, and I'm here for it. I'm here for that type of reaction.
Well, and I love your excitement for tangents because I think some of us, we have a hard time going off like the plan, but I talk a lot about how like if you want your students to have more discussions and to really engage in the conversation, then you have to be like open to going off the plan and like encouraging their questions. Because if they constantly ask questions and you're like, I don't know, or we don't have time for it, then it's a lot harder to get them to keep asking those questions and having this conversation. So I love that you said that. So I wanted to interview you because I've just loved seeing your work on Instagram. It's just beautiful and you're just so gifted artistically. And I'm just so not, like I've said. So I would love just to hear more about how you incorporate art into how you teach. Like, why are you using visuals? Why are they so important? Tell us everything we need to know about it.
Okay. So my first jump into all this was when I started my very first year. It was the just epitome of a government funded classroom. Like I got there and it was super dated, everything. There's no windows, there's no storage, no counters, like nothing sciencey here. I had no posters, or the posters I did have, I didn't count because they were terrible, like just terrible, generic, like science posters that nobody wants to look at. And from my perspective, if you have a poster, I'm pretty sure you want people to look at it. Otherwise, like, what's the point of it? So my first dabble into public education was just that there was nothing like really there to entice kids to like look around the room or really even their notes, because my First of all, the teachers, the school that I went into, that was the first time having seventh grade science back in the school since 2008. So I started teaching in 2015, and they had, since 2008, eliminated all science for sixth grade and seventh grade, and then had the eighth grade teachers in 1 year teach sixth, seventh, and eighth.
Why? What
So
was the
I,
rationale?
I don't, because they didn't have to take the SOL or the test at the end of the
Oh,
year until eighth grade. So they're like, we don't need these other teachers. You guys can just teach it all at once.
wow.
So with that, obviously these teachers are working their butts off trying to teach all of the stuff in 1 year. So the notes were also like packed and not very enticing either, like very overwhelming. So my mentors, they did what they can to help, but they've obviously been overwhelmed. And so I felt like I was working from scratch. My two other science teachers, they are brand new teachers too. So I found quickly that incorporating visuals not only made me happier about like my environment and the notes I was presenting to my kids, but it helped my kids out too. And so I started making these anchor charts on like the big post-it chart paper, and I would do them as we would go through the units. So as I did this, I was finding that I could make them manipulative with the sticky notes. Like my first ones were cells. So we could have our sticky notes to label these anchor charts together as a class. And then as would go throughout the year, I would find that they were retaining information better with these extra visuals and also going through their notebooks more easily. Like, for example, I like to let them use their notes on assessments when I'm able to. And for them, one, having all those visuals in their notes kind of makes that connection between the visual and the vocab word. But then it also helps them kind of look at their notes and not get so overwhelmed because it's not just text there. It's got good visuals that help break up the content. And then also kind of, I like to have my visuals really specific to one vocab word, like nucleotide. I've got a nucleotide up there. And I found that by incorporating all of that stuff, they were retaining material better. They were less intimidated. And then they were also starting to like how the classroom was looking as the year was going. Because I learned really quickly, I'm not about to decorate this whole classroom. One, I didn't have the stuff at the beginning of the year, but then two, I don't know, like it just wasn't useful information at that point. So we build the classroom together with the anchor charts that we did together. And so they could look back and kind of have this visual representation as well of everything that they've learned. And so now that I have all these anchor charts made, I've digitized them now too, so that even though they're already complete, because I am not trying to make those every single year,
Right.
that's just too much. But so what I do now to incorporate the visuals at the beginning of the unit, I will take all of my charts that are related to that unit and I'll put them in a visual space in my classroom. So when we get to start that lesson, the kids kind of see that wall as like this preview to what we're about to teach. And then now that I have them digital, I incorporate them into their student notebooks too to further chunk their notes into digestible pieces for them. And we'll just complete the charts together on the smartboard, which has worked really nicely.
So are you doing traditional notes and then you're also incorporating these, or are you just doing these for your notes?
It depends on the topic.
Okay.
So for genetics, I'll do the anchor charts with my main source of notes. Well, actually, let me think, because I use them both. It depends on the topic, honestly. So genetics, because it's super vocab heavy, going from a chromosome all the way to like your nitrogen bases, I use those initially at the beginning of the lesson, and I have them do like kind of a scavenger hunt type thing where I put the complete charts around the room in different spaces other than the large preview that I mentioned earlier. And then I give them the blank charts. So they'll go around the room to complete it themselves. And then we'll talk about it. And then I have for that unit, I have the notes that still has imagery. I have it on my Instagram actually, but it's got like, it still has the drawings in there too, but it has more notes within it. So I like to do that where they have exposure visually to the vocab words and then they see it in the notes afterwards. So that makes it nice to make the connections. But it really does depend on the unit. If I do have a unit where we have a lot more information, I'll have the notes, but I'll have lots of imagery in there too, like with clip art to break up the different sections of the notes.
I love that. And so if you like haven't seen her page, I'm obviously going to link it in the show notes, but you'll see how beautiful these are. And so for teachers that may purchase yours to use who aren't as artistically gifted like me, would your recommendation then be like get them printed big and in color as like nice posters and then use like a black and white with our students to have and go along with them? Or what would be your recommendation for a non, like, if I was going to use your resources, what would I do?
So I would suggest what you were saying, have it large and in charge on the wall so that they can see it and reference it often. But I have heard like a lot of people don't have, the wall space. So and I don't always have the wall space either. So if I have the wall space, I'll put them up there and I'll rotate them as we go through them. I like to bring up the most relevant charts like to the side of my board so that students can reference them really quickly. But otherwise, if I don't have any space at all, I just project them on my smart board because it's still very big up there. And then I have the like notebook sized versions in their notebook. And to save paper, I'll usually do like 2 charts for one computer piece of paper. They'll fold it and put it in their notebook. But that has worked really well for me, especially with space. And having it up there on the board is a great visual because you can write right on it with the expo marker since because I have templates up there where it's like the text boxes are empty so you can fill them out together as a class. So that's probably what the best route I would do.
Awesome. What's one of your favorite visuals that you have available? Like if someone was like, I want to try this with my students, which one would you be like, you should try this one. This one's awesome.
Okay. So I have a couple. I've mentioned the genetics ones. I really like the genetics ones because they really look great on the wall in terms of sequencing them, starting from the smallest unit and working your way up. My kids really struggle with all of those words that come with a genetics unit, from the parts of a DNA molecule to talking about alleles and genotypes and phenotypes and all of that stuff. So I have had so much success with those because I like to include like little clues or visual aids in the posters to help make further connections. I've seen a lot of success with that one particularly. But then the one that I use all throughout the year would be things like my scientific variables poster. It's got like 2 beagles up there with like visual differences for your experimental variable, all that stuff. Anyways, that one's always at the front of my room. And that one really helps my kids because no matter how often we go over variables, I feel like they always slip back into mixing up like constants and controls. So having that visual up on the board has been really helpful as well.
That's awesome. So do you leave those up when your students are taking tests, you said?
No. So they can stay in their notebook. And that's like one of my things is if your notebook is up to date, go ahead and use them. Like I want you to have an up-to-date notebook. I want all your notes together because so often their notes are they can be messy if they're not going along with the class. So it's an incentive, but with the on the wall, no, because I have them hung up with like clothespins and I will just kind of take the bottom of the poster and fold it up and clip it in. So it looks like a folded up piece of paper and you can't see anything on them. So I will fold those up, but then leave their notebooks as available tools for them.
Okay. And so I don't do notebooks. So I have another follow-up question for you. Do you collect and grade notebooks? Like how do you manage the, holding them accountable for the notebook? I know you said an incentive is doing it so they can use it on the test, but are you taking like notebooks home to grade or what are you doing with that?
No. Oh my God. So I
Good.
started off, I'm like, I started
Mhm.
like that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do notebook checks. And that was awful. That was awful. It took so much time to do that. And then for what? Like, what is my point of even grading that? I get we're keeping them accountable, but that's where the incentive of using it on assessments works. So, yeah, it was just a lot of time to go through and grade all their notebooks. I've done notebook quizzes in the past where I'd be like, okay, go to page 5. What is the picture on
Mhm.
page 5? And do stuff like that. Or I've just had them use their notes on assessments. And I feel like that works the best for me
Mhm.
and saves a lot of time too.
Totally. What do you do then for labs? Like if they're going to do a lab, do they do it in their notebook? Do they do it outside and you grade it, or how does that work?
I just have them do it outside and grade it. And then if they have like paperwork that we do turn back, it'll be like identifying the variables or telling me what was like the reflection piece of
Mhm.
the lab itself. But otherwise I will collect that.
Okay, cool. That's helpful just from a practical standpoint for anyone listening who also uses notebooks. Okay, so a few more questions for you before we really push the limits of nap time. Thinking back to like your first few years in the classroom, now that you're 8 years in, is there anything you wish you could go back and just do differently?
Oh gosh. Okay. I have a couple that I would go back to. One, I would definitely be contacting parents more regularly
Mhm.
for positive reasons as well as negative ones.
Yes.
Because the more I did that, I had parents that are just like, they're like, "Oh, you have something positive to like," and then the students will come back and say, "Hey, my mom gave me my phone back because you gave her a
Yes.
positive."
It
I
builds
was like, "Hey,
so much rapport with students when you reach
it
out
does.
positively on their behalf. Totally.
It does." And it's such a worthwhile investment of my time because I really dislike calling parents because it seems to always be for the negative side of things. And so while it is an investment in time, it's so worth it because when I have a problem to talk about, if I ever do, there's solid ground between the two of us. And it helps a lot, especially when a lot of parents that I've encountered seem to think, I don't know, there's just a lot of, I don't want any waters being cloudy or the impression that I'm picking on their student, XYZ, for
Mhm.
whatever reason a parent might have against some of these phone calls, which I can understand how they could feel that way if they're always getting negative phone calls home from
Totally.
all these other teachers. Yeah. So
Well,
definitely
and
paying attention to that.
I feel like when you share the positive, then the parent's like, oh, they really know my student. Because a lot of times when you share
Yeah.
negative with a parent, they go on defense of their student because they're like, well, you don't know them. So I'm going to justify this or whatever. But when you can give that positive feedback, then they're like, oh, they see my student, they know them. And then they're so much
Hmm.
more like receptive of any sort of critique or
Yes.
criticism.
Yes. It's like, listen, I love your kids. I would not be a teacher
Yeah.
unless was really invested in your child's future. Like, these kids are important to me. This is why I
Right.
choose to be here. I don't want any parent under the impression that I am not in it for their child.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely the positive phone calls, but then also just like not overdoing everything and being more mindful of my time. I feel like having a kid really put that into motion, but I could have gotten so much more done if I was much more focused with the time that I had at school.
Hmm. I remember being in college and I was double major and I was like I was working in a dance studio and I was teaching dance like to make some money and I was like
Oh, wow.
volunteering. I had a lot going on, but I remember a
Yeah.
mentor in my life saying, you'll never have more time than you do right now. And I was like, you're crazy. But he was so right. And I think back on
Yeah.
that a lot. Like we don't realize how much time we have in some of our present seasons until we're in the next season. And so I try to really think about that in the midst of a crazy season, being like, it is a season. This isn't forever. I may have
Mhm.
even less time later. I may have more time. I don't know. But just to not, I hold things really tightly because I am so type A. And I feel like if I went back, I wish I could just be like, it's okay.
Yes, yes, take it
It's
easy,
going to
you're
be
okay.
okay. Yeah. Okay. So
Some of this
any,
stuff is just not worth stressing over,
yes,
and yeah, that your mentor is very wise.
he was. Okay. So any advice maybe specifically for middle school teachers? Because I do think a lot like translates from middle to high school, but I know I have a lot of listeners that are middle school teachers and I wouldn't qualify myself as that. So any advice just for them as they're listening and relating with middle schoolers?
I would say, for one, don't take anything too seriously. Take things day by day. So many people, when I say that I teach middle school, they're like, oh, like, bless your heart, yada, yada, yada. And it's this past year, especially, was the most like emotional roller coaster that I've been on, not because of me, but because of my kids. They're just going like through it. And literally every day is so different. And so I feel just by like, one, don't take everything so seriously. Like, be silly, be weird, make fun of yourself, go on the tangents that we talked about earlier, really communicate with your kids. Like, I had somebody observe my class once and they're like, oh, you like really communicate with your kids. I said, well, doesn't everybody? And he was like, no, he doesn't. They don't. And I was like, oh, and I feel like that extra communication, that extra like understanding that they are going through it and they might hate you one day, but love you the next. I don't know. Understanding that we're all on this crazy roller coaster together and loosening up and having fun with them and really talking to them, even if your pacing is really tight. It's like a worthwhile investment to give them.
I agree. Okay. Last but not least, before I let you go, I always like to ask, since this is a Secondary Science Simplified podcast, is there any way that you've been simplifying your life recently and it's really benefited you? And it could be in the classroom, in the home. It could really be anything. So just one thing you're doing right now to help simplify your life.
Okay. So I thought about this, and a lot of people probably will not like this, but waking up early is everything. Everything. So I found myself, my most productive, favorite, and enjoyable year involved me waking up at 4 a.m. Might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I would wake up at 4 a.m. I would go to the gym, then I would go to school and my brain is just, I guess the better answer here would be making sure you have carved out time for yourself when your brain is there. Right. And for me, that is in the morning before I'm bogged down with everybody. I cannot function at nighttime. I am like brain dead at the end of the day. So I'm not getting anything done by staying up late. So for me, it takes some adjusting. I'm not doing it every single day, especially now with kids, but just waking up, even if it's just a little bit earlier, it makes a huge difference because you feel taken care of yourself. You have all potential problems thought about. Like if you're at school on a weekday early, you have nobody to fight for with the copier. It's like little things like that where it's worth waking up earlier to have extra time and kind of be with yourself, center yourself. That has been so helpful to me. And it's really hard now, especially with a 4-month-old and a 3-year-old. But every day that I do it, it's hard to do it, but I'm so glad I did.
I agree. I feel like I need like an hour head start before I see other humans to like, and I'm a morning person too, but just to like, I like to drink my coffee hot. I want to just like take some breaths. I want to turn my brain on. Like I want to.
Yes.
And one thing that helps me too is I have my like phone set to like downtime and I have it go like an hour past when I plan on waking up so that the first hour that I'm awake, my phone's still like shut down. And that helps me too, not to get distracted. Cause I think we can like, that's where time gets lost too. But I really like that quiet. And I like what you said too, like not everyone's going to be able to get up at 4 or be a morning person, but having your carved out time, I just think is so important too. So I love that you're doing that even with middle of the night wake ups that you're probably still having.
Yeah, it's a roller coaster. Okay. But we're getting it done.
And they're only little for so short, you know, and you know, because you already have a 3-year-old, so you know. It's easier the other times because you have perspective like this too shall pass, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, seriously, thank you for joining and letting me ask you all sorts of side questions we didn't plan for.
That's perfectly good.
And I'm glad Lance was here for part of it. And he's on his first podcast at 4 months old. So
I know he's ahead of the game, man.
Such an overachiever already. But thank you so much. Seriously.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here. As I said, I was nervous earlier, but it was very enjoyable to talk to you. So thank you.
I loved it. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rachael as much as I did. If you have questions for her, you can find her on Instagram at The Weird Science Teacher. And you can also head to the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 49, where I will link her TPT store and some of the visual resources that she mentioned. Now, we have one more guest episode coming later in December, but I am currently planning out guests to ask to be on the podcast for 2023. So if you have anyone you would like for me to interview on the podcast, email me at rebecca@itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com or shoot me a DM on Instagram at It's Not Rocket Science and just let me know. I am happy to reach out to anyone that y'all want to hear from and see if they would like to be on the podcast. So let me know who you would like to hear from and we'll see if we can make it happen. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.